My name is Petra and I'm a cartographer at MapTiler, and today I would like to tell you something about cartographic design for vector tiles, best practices and open source recipes for beautiful maps. I did a presentation with my colleague Nicolas Bozon, who unfortunately couldn't be here, but I sent him my greetings and thanks. Okay, so just briefly about vector tiles. So vector tiles come in the zoom level pyramid, usually in pseudo-Mercator projection, because it's convenient as the world is a square at the zoom level 0. Each tile can be found by ZXY position. Vector features are encoded in PBF format, which is lightweight and pretty fast on the performance. And the biggest difference compared to raster tiles is that vector keeps data only, and style is rendered by the client, which enables us to do the on-the-fly styling. And what defines the visual appearance of a vector tiles map is the style JSON. So this is like open source format. It's a typical JSON object with some specific root level and nested properties. I forgot to mention, but if you don't see the code snippet properly, you can also open the presentation here at this URL. So yeah, about the root properties. So some of them doesn't have to do anything with the visual appearance of a map, such as version name, metadata, but these are important for the information. Then, for example, layers and sources, these are pretty critical because they define the features that will be loading in your map. Glyphs are for loading of fonts, sprites for loading of icons, but these are not like mandatory, but it's nice to have them. And center, zoom, etc. This tells the renderer the initial position of your map. For example, you are zoomed in on Kosovo or something like that. What makes the style JSON format so powerful in terms of vector tiles cartography are the expressions. So these are like formulas for layout and paint properties and for filters, and they use some kind of operators, can be mathematical, logical, string, etc. And you can see some such examples of expressions here in the code snippets. So for example, the one at the right bottom side, it's expression for the fill color. It's using match expression and basically assigning a color based on the class. For example, you have different color for crop or scrub, and all the other classes will have white color, 0, 0, 100. Then you have, for example, expression for a filter, like pretty simple, this filtering out countries, which has ISO A2 attribute. And then the expression for the text size that's interpolating the size based on the zoom level and also based on the rank of the city. So these are some kind of like pretty simple expressions, but you can have also pretty complicated ones. You can combine the expressions together and create some nested ones. These examples come from the Svistopo vector-based maps, which are like one of the most beautiful in terms of vector tiles cartography. And yeah, I won't dig too much deeper into these expressions, but please feel free to look into the presentation later. And for example, you can get inspired by the syntax. Yeah, and now I would like to move on to some best practices when you are starting to write the JSONs. So maybe most of you already are proficient, but if there's someone who would like to start and doesn't know how, yeah, these will be just my tips that worked for me from the start. So first one would be to use editors and validators, because of course we are people, we make some mistakes, and these will catch your typos or like syntax errors. So as for me, I prefer to use Visual Studio Code when I know exactly what I want to adjust in the code. Then of course I use also Maputnik. I believe most of you already know, so that's open source tool for developing styles. It's more like codeless, but still you can write JSON there. And you can see the screenshot from Maputnik here. And we even currently use it in MapTiler for developing styles. And then when I need to do something pretty quickly, just validate JSON or something like that, I use some JSON editors and validators online. You can find some that will work for you, but for example, I tend to use the JSON lint. Then if you are using Chrome, I would also recommend the JSON View extension. So that would basically format any JSON you find online, and you don't need to somehow load it into some editor on your PC. Yeah, so that's it. The second tip from me would be to start from some existing styles because, yeah, it's pretty hard to start from scratch, and even I still start from some existing ones because you have the root property structure there, even if you just completely override the style JSON. So you can, of course, use MapTiler styles. You just need to log in into cloud, and then it's for free for personal use. But if you are looking for something open source, I can recommend Open MapTiler styles. And my colleague Tom Bohanka will have a presentation about Open MapTiles project on Friday at 3 p.m. So yeah, if you are interested, be sure to not miss it. Then the third tip would be to think about colors. So yeah, back at the university, we had this one professor who was telling us this thing, think before you draw. And that's kind of what I do when I first start to create style JSON. So I basically more or less know what colors I will use, or color schemes. But for example, when I don't have inspiration, I go to some palette generators online, so you can see some of them here. And there are also some pretty cool ones like open source, such as Cartographer, that's pretty cartography focused. Or you can also think about the complementary color space. For example, you have one favorite color that you want to really use, but you don't know what other stuff you want to use. So yeah, it's also good to look at the color wheel. Yeah. So that was it for the starting tips, but now I would like to move on to some best practices for the actual map design. So again, these are not rules or anything, it's something that works for me, and maybe you can take inspiration from that. So the first one is a monochromatic map. So this is basically what I use when I want to create a pretty minimalistic base map for some overlay data. So I use HSL model and these values of lightness, and I can tell you that this will create pretty simple and nice looking map. For example, if you are focused on your country or even a city and you don't have the ocean around, you can switch the land and water lightness values, and the land will act as your background. I think that most of you are already kind of proficient with using OSN data, so you may know how complex the roads are there. So you might wonder how to style them for them to look good. So what I do is that I style the road networks by class. I first create some kind of groups or hierarchy of the classes. So for example, you have motorway and trunk group, and then primary, secondary, tertiary, or some minors. Or you can do whatever you would prefer. For example, have just motorway as the first one, then trunk primary, then for example secondary, tertiary, etc. But it's good to have this kind of structure first. Then you of course style the width based on the zoom level, so it looks good. As for me, I tend to start at zoom level 5 with, for example, the motorway only, with values 0 to 0.5 to 1. And as you are going into bigger zooms, you add and you gradually add, and then on, for example, zoom level 20, I will end up with something like 24. Of course, I would recommend to use the interpolate expression so that the zooming is pretty smooth. So this defines linear or other relationships between the width and the zoom level. And yeah, it will create nice experience when zooming with the vector tiles map. Then you may also wonder how to create outline for the road network. So it's line feature. So in JSON, it doesn't have outline property or something like that. So you can duplicate the layers, and you need to be kind of sure about the order. So you will have the casing layer underneath the road network, and you will add +1 or +2 points in width. And that will create the casing layer, and you will just change the color as you prefer. Yeah, and that's it. Basically, you can see some example of the code on the right side, and there are many other line properties, such as, for example, dash array, that is quite useful for roads under construction or footways and stuff. Yeah, you may also wonder how to do like bathymetry and hypsometric mapping with style JSON. So it's pretty simple. What I do is that I match the colors based on the depth values or the height values, and you need to create intervals based on your data values. So you can do that, for example, with some like statistical methods, such as like normal distribution or like in QGIS, or you can do by trial and error, see how it looks in the map. And about the color ramp, so you can use some existing ones online, or in the case of bathymetry, you can, for example, select your favorite shade of blue, and then you will be just slightly adjusting the saturation and lightness with each interval, and that will create a nice looking color ramp. And you can do the same for contours and labels, but just, for example, inverted. So with the labels, you will go, for example, from like white to light blue, and that will create like kind of a final touch. Yeah, and when you are creating like global maps, it's also important to think about fonts. So fonts are stored in the glyphs JSON property with two tokens, font stack and range. But if you don't want to deal with the fonts yourself, like you don't want to be creating your own, that's like pretty hard. You can use some already existing ones. So for example, we have like open MapTiles fonts on the GitHub, and these are also open source, and there are 5 of them: Noto Sans, Open Sans, PT Sans, Roboto, and Metropolis. As for me, I really like the Metropolis one, but that's completely like up to you. And there are like many text layer properties which will help you to achieve what you want in case of labeling. So there's of course the text field. It can be something like pretty simple, like English name, or you can have both Latin and non-Latin names together, or you can use like a concat expression that's over there on the right side. That's getting basically name and elevation together. Then you also need to kind of think about the fallback font, because, for example, if you are using the Metropolis, that supports only like Latin characters. So, for example, in Arabic states, you will be in trouble. So it's good to always have a fallback font there, to which it will switch in this case. So here I would recommend the Noto Sans font as a fallback, because that's like pretty universal in terms of these characters. Then as for the size of the labels, it's also good to style it based on the zoom level, and you can also use like classes, rank, or population for cities, or elevation for the peaks. And even you can create some kind of hierarchy with the text size. So for example, as you can see here on the code sample, like I'm basically matching the classes based on the zoom level, but the class that is not, for example, ocean on the zoom level 1 will have like text size of 0, so that means it won't be there. So you have like ocean on the zoom level 1, then seas on zoom level 3, for example. Yeah, and a specific property of the text layers is the halo, so that's like outline around the text. And as for me, I prefer to have it like, for example, with transparency of like 80% and blur of like 0.2. So just so you know how that can look. So this Kathmandu has basically like my favorite setup. But then the national parks have like 50% of these values, and the small towns have like 0, so they don't have any halo. So yeah, that depends really on you, but in terms of labeling, if you are using the halo, it will kind of highlight the labels that you want, for example, the capital cities. Yeah, now about sprites. So this is the URL for loading icons in the style JSON. Usually it's rasterized from SVGs using, for example, Sprite 0 utility. And the SVGs can be adjusted in some graphics software. As for me, I use Inkscape, which is open source. But yeah, you can use whatever suits you. And the sprites are loaded in the icon image property. It can be something pretty simple, like you can have icon image shop, for example, but you can also write expressions for the icon image, as you can see on the right side. So there is like coalesce expression which will go through the values and get the first non-zero value. So for example, if the icon doesn't have any class, it will assign its subclass, for example, like hairdresser. But if it doesn't have even that, it will just assign the dot image. So yeah, you can use this. Then there are some like layout properties which you can again somehow use for your benefits. So for example, with the icon opacity, you can again create some kind of like hierarchy. So for example, here I am basically filtering out at the zoom level 15 only some classes like castle, golf, hospital, stadium, etc. And all other classes will have opacity of 0, so they won't be there. But from the zoom level 16, then there are basically all of them. If you don't want to be creating like your own icons, you can use some ready-to-use ones as Mackie. So that's open source, and that's also like a pretty nice icon set. And as for the future, right now in MapTiler we are working on SDF icons, which have like different encoding, so it enables like parameterization, so you can do like outlines and fill color, which you can see, for example, here on the Prizren. Yeah, so that was for the style JSON. So as you can see, it's like pretty powerful format in terms of vector tiles cartography, but nowadays the trend is kind of like go more into the direction of codeless approach, or maybe you don't want to be digging into writing style JSON. So here I would like to invite you to check our new MapTiler Customize, which will be like released pretty soon. Yeah, so if you can see it, oh yeah. So here I am going to the quick edits panel, and basically we are working with the HSL model, which is like pretty convenient for a cartographer, because as you can see, you can like completely shift colors of the map in just one click. You can, for example, desaturate a bit, add a bit of lightness, and you have like a nice kind of tuned out base map for your overlay data just in a few clicks. Then we have the layers panel. Here we are storing all the layers in a block structure based on their use case. You can also search for them, so it's like better orientation than in Maputnik. You can also like style the layers here, for example, based on the zoom, and you have like exponential interpolation between the zooms. And here I'm switching to the data panel, which will tell you what data you have in the map or you could have in the map. So here we basically see that I have neighborhood class, residential and suburb class of the land use included in the map, the green spaces. But for example, I can decide I want to have like commercial, hospital or university there, and I can add it just like that. And basically, yeah, that's it. And now I have the classes in the map, and I didn't need to know anything about that. You can also do some bulk edits of the whole blocks. For example, here I'm shifting the lightness of transportation, but I, for example, decided that I don't like the labels outline, and I can just bulk edit this as well. Here I will be switching to data sources, so that's kind of like inspect in the Maputnik, if you know that. But here you can, for example, go to one layer, see what layers you have like included in the maps and grasswood, and all the classes and subclasses possible to like include in the style. But you don't need to basically know that they are there, just for your check what you have in the map. Yeah, and basically that's it for the demo. And here are just some other open source contributions of MapTiler. But yeah, I will just rush it up, maybe.
As I said, I won't cut you off.
Yeah, okay, so just pretty quickly, MapLibre is an open source fork of Mapbox GL.js, so we are building pretty very many things on top of MapLibre. Also, my colleague Jonathan will be having a presentation about SDK of MapTiler, which is built on top of MapLibre. Then also the Open Map Tiles project, which is turning like OpenStreetMap data into vector tiles. And you may know also the QGIS MapTiler plugin, which enables you to fetch our base maps directly into your QGIS desktop. So that is everything from me, and thanks for your attention.